just waiting to be free. Lonely and forlorn, I am crying. I long for my time to come. Death means just life. Please let me die in solitude.
Hey, it's 1986. We just kicked out our cassette tape of Candlemass, Epicus, Doomicus, Metallicus with the song Solitude. This is Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And this is part 6, so I guess this would be the fourth most crucial year in metal history. Hotly contested.
In our opinions.
Yeah.
Or coming from our standpoint of when we got into it and whatnot, too.
Yeah, and historical impact, and trying to take into consideration a lot of different things. And originally, we had this year ranked as the number 2 greatest year, and it fell a couple slots in hindsight as we reevaluated some stuff. But that's how we go around here. We're always up for reevaluation and unique perspectives and things like that.
And we could change this and do it next year and just change it.
Exactly. There you go. But I hope not, because it was a lot of paperwork and planning that went into all this kind of crap. But 86 is for a lot of historians, it's kind of considered the sort of greatest year ever for thrash, in terms of thrash masterpieces, which we'll be talking about, like Master of Puppets and Rain and Blood and Peace Sells and Darkness Descends and things like that. But as an overall year, it has some things going on within the underground that we'll talk about later in the show, and it's got some sort of traditional metal. Maiden's putting out strong record this year, Motörhead strong record for things like this are happening, but.
Judas Priest putting out some not so strong.
Yeah, not so strong record. Turbo was released this year, which is an ill-fated attempt for Priest to kind of tap into the new wave keyboard kind of hair metal stuff that was kind of going on.
Really amp up the homosexual undertones.
Yeah, definitely. Although Wayne Isham did direct that video for Turbo. And
Turbo Lover.
He went on and did like Girls, Girls, Girls and Enter Sandman and actually halfway decent videos, but kind of funny. But yeah, kind of deciding to open up before we talk too much about 86 with Candlemass is because this band, as we've talked about in previous episodes with Trouble that was happening in America, was just sort of out of left field and really doesn't fit in anywhere else. They were almost kind of single-handedly kind of rebirthing the doom metal genre in Europe. Meanwhile, Trouble was sort of kind of doing it in America in their own kind of weird way. Candlemass was sort of, because they were coming out of Sweden, was bringing all these like amazing like guitar melodies and guitar solos and different things, whereas like Trouble was more like blues, kind of just like sludge along,
and vocally
like Vitus and Pentagram type stuff.
Vocally nobody else was really doing what Candlemass was doing with that kind of backdrop. Like King Diamond was, but it was more in the heavy metal spectrum, definitely not as doomy as Epicus. Plus, it's probably one of the best album titles I think ever.
Oh man, it just kind of a play on words with the old Blue Cheer record from '68, the Vincibus Eruptus or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's classic album cover. Not a classic lineup though, because it doesn't quite feature Messiah. He comes on the next record in '87 with Nightfall, but Johan Lundqvist does a pretty nice job, I think. And Solitude's kind of one of their flagship songs. And
it's kind of the Diano Maiden kind of transition.
Yeah,
a little bit like rougher on the edges for Epicus, but
still has its personalities and charms
totally,
and things like that going on. But Candlemass, we did a show not too long back on Candlemass, and definitely big fans. And if you haven't kind of made that exploration, definitely worth your while. But 86 was kind of the year hair metal broke from my perspective, because 86 was the year where I really sort of became conscious of all this sort of stuff. That was when I bought Slippery When Wet from Bon Jovi on cassette tape, and then got into this wonderful debate with my older babysitter, and he's like, Bon Jovi's for pussies, man. You got to listen to Poison. Look at the cat dragged in. That's where it's at. Pussies. So, but what it did is it sort of put the challenge for me to kind of continue to find heavier music, on the table.
Yeah.
So hey, and that kind of worked out all right.
Well, if you hear any popping in the background, we're not in South Central LA. It's almost the nation's independence birthday.
It is.
And we got some hillbillies firing off stuff in the background. So.
Yes, there's some 4th of July festivities taking place. And even though this episode will come out clearly when it's done, I'm going to go on the record and say that I'm supporting the Netherlands to win the World Cup right now. I don't know who's going to win it. By the time you hear this episode, it'll be like old news. But
yeah.
I'm making the mark right now. 4th of July and Netherlands. That's what's happening right now. But you had Ozzy Osbourne putting out Ultimate Sin. as I already mentioned, the Poisons, things like that, Cinderella, Night Songs, AC/DC, Who Made Who, Vinnie Vincent Invasion. Europe's The Final Countdown, which it's just remarking to mark 26 countries, #1 record. That's
I mean, you can never live up to that again.
You can make fun of Europe all you want, but that's a hell of a run that they made.
Another Swedish band, right?
Yeah, another Swedish band. Had some really cool. John Norum was a pretty awesome guitar player. He actually filled in for George Lynch and Dokken when Lynch left. But Queensryche, Rage for Order, which is a pretty strong record and really kind of hinted towards Operation Mindcrime type stuff. And then Wasps Inside the Electric Circus, which you say a lot of metalheads like hold up.
It's kind of touted, but I don't like it.
I'm a bigger fan of the debut, the self-titled.
Yeah, I mean, just there's real no standout songs, and I don't know.
Wasp was a late coming band for me because I didn't really grow up with Wasp as much because nobody.
I remember seeing like my uncle would have Judas Priest posters and Wasp posters and stuff up, but I was like until I started hearing people do covers of like I Want to Be Somebody and stuff like that before I really got into it.
I think I gained a greater sense of appreciation for Wasp after interviewing Blind Guardian the first time, and Hansi said that was his major influence, like Freddie Mercury and Blackie Lawless from Wasp, and I was kind of like, oh, that's
and Blackie kind of at the point when I was getting into the extreme metal stuff, 89, 90, Blackie Lawless was kind of an outspoken dick.
Yeah,
he really had rubbed people the wrong way a lot.
Well,
so I think that kind of
Chris Holmes
attributed to it.
Decline of Western Civilization. Watching him drunk in the pool and all that stuff. And then one other, I guess, big metal event. I don't know if metal, hard rock, whatever you want to call it, but this is also the controversial year when Van Halen put out 5150 with Sammy Hagar. Could they survive post
Cabo Wabo?
Yeah, they did, but I don't know whether anyone gave a crap in metal. I don't think so. But anyways, some other things that are kind of happening in traditional metal around this time is I was talking to Mark is some of the flagship bands were putting out really strong records. In a way like the Motörhead Orgasmatron is like I don't want to say the last masterpiece, but it's almost like part of that like classic era with Ace of Spades and I'm drawing a blank. No Sleep Till Hammersmith.
I mean, it's basically the classic lineup as well with Filthy, Taylor, Lemmy, and God, why am I drawing a blank on the other dude?
I'm trying to remember. I can see their photos, but unfortunately I don't have the liner notes.
Oh, lovely. Well, it's oppressively hot, so that's as much information as you'll get right now. But this is, the kind of like the classic era Motörhead.
And the song itself, Orgasmatron, is really like sort of a giant FU. Like, I mean, it's such a statement of purpose.
Well,
from
huge
Lemmy.
Anti-religion song.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like the sort of like punk metal, like Symphony for the Devil or something like that. You know what I mean? It's got that kind of like.
Well, and it's so incredibly simple, too. I mean, that's and then I knew of this with the Sepultura cover.
I was gonna say people like you and I found this with Sepultura, and then went back. But I mean, I think it's one of the most metallic Motörhead songs that they've ever written. If any,
and don't call them metal band. They're rock and roll, dude.
Exactly. Whereas like a lot of their songs are based in like this sort of fast punk kind of rock and roll stuff. This one has like a very much a metal feel to it. So, and then Iron Maiden's putting out Somewhere in Time, which you're the resident, I guess, Maiden expert. But this is
this is Adrian Smith writing it and doing lyrics.
On most of the record or the whole thing?
Just this song.
Okay,
this song.
Years.
He did a couple on this one, and it seems like it's kind of like the most, I guess, personal song I think Maiden's really done, where it feels like they're taking something out of themselves and putting it into outside of like their actual experiences, and it's not just like Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great or this kind of stuff. Which is on this record. Loneliness is a long distance runner, which as a long distance runner I can relate to the loneliness. Which I never understood that. The lyrics as a kid, I was like, what does this even mean?
I think it's a poem. Loneliness, a long distance runner was.
I'm sure it is
a poem.
Yeah, I'm sure that's one of Bruce's songs.
This is one of my favorite covers, definitely, because you get the back cover, which it's like the Where's Waldo. You get to find all the like really neat little like inside jokes that Maiden's.
Well, it's one of the few that actually has Maiden on it, painted in the background too, and you get to see a little bit of what came before and into the future through the void or whatever this got here. But
now, would you say that this? I mean, Seventh Son is a great record, but it's definitely like a change in sound and maybe not as like revered by some people.
It's got some great songs on it, but Seventh Son, as far as I'm concerned, it's not. It's a little too spit and polish. It doesn't have a lot of that. It doesn't have like some of the attitude that some of the previous records had, production wise too. A little bit rough, having something a little bit rough, and it's so clean and spit and polished. That's what kind of turned me off to it.
So would you say somewhere in time, like this kind of ends the like original like kind of Maiden cycle of just like masterpieces one after another?
I mean, that's kind of the common consensus with a lot of people I know, that this is kind of the last record after Seventh Son came out, they're like, yeah, it's okay.
You know, I mean, No Prayer for the Dying is like...
No Prayer for the Dying, I think, is probably one of their weakest records.
Yeah.
Even going into the Blaze Bayley era. I mean, I think it's probably Virtual 11 is an absolute turd. And...
but the first Blaze is
X
actually
Factor,
okay.
it's got really good songs on it, but it's got Blaze singing. But I've got actually a live disc with Dickinson doing, I'm trying to think there's 2 or 3 of the songs on there.
Yeah.
Man on the Edge.
I'm trying to remember some of those tunes.
A couple other ones. Sign of the Southern Cross, is that one too?
That's Black Sabbath.
It's something similar
but
to
it's
that.
Southern Cross, I think, or something like that. I know what you're talking about. But yeah, so like, again, even though like this year's known more for like thrash metal, there were still like big records like by traditional heavy metal bands like Motörhead, like Iron Maiden, and as we'll also hear after Orgasmatron and Wasted Years, it's the Return of the King.
That's right.
Make it
Fatal
a comeback.
Portrait.
Yeah. The first King Diamond solo record, and the first of really a string of like 3 or 4 kind of masterpieces here, with them and Abigail and Conspiracy. But King Diamond picks himself back up after the demise of Merciful Fate, and grabs Andy LaRocque and a couple of the old members of Merciful Fate, and
it's basically just Merciful Fate continued. Merciful Fate Mark II, outside of a couple like major musical kind of.
I was going to say,
I
feel like it's not only you get the concept record for the first time, which he's kind of famous for, but I think it's more like melodic. It's less like it's less heavy, but like more like.
Well, you don't get those like kind of like cutting Hank Sherman riffs that are. It's kind of it's more dirty in the metal realm, but then crazy solos. This is, I guess, across the board a little bit kind of smoothed out, ironed out.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a little more spit and polished, if you will.
And it's a lot more theatrical, I would say, as well.
Yeah, over the top is maybe the word we're looking for. So, but so that's what we're gonna kind of head into next is some classic metal. We got Motörhead's Orgasmatron from Orgasmatron, Somewhere in Time, Iron Maiden with Wasted Years, one of Mark and I's favorite tunes, and then King Diamond's Fatal Portrait with Dressed in White, which has some pretty awesome Andy LaRocque guitar stuff. And then we'll end with a surprise, which will kind of lead us into our next conversation. So enjoy Orgasmatron.
Psychopaths and rebel I speak of great heroic days, of victory and fight. I hold a banner drenched in blood. I urge you to be brave. I lead you to your destiny. I lead you to your grave. Your bones will build my palaces. Your eyes will stud my crown. For I am Mars, the god of war, and I will cut you down.
dark, I'd like to not wake up dead. I'm hoping tomorrow morning after the 4th of July celebration. That was Peace Sells, but Who's Buying, Wake Up Dead, Megadeth, then King Diamond, Maiden, and Motörhead before that. This is, as mentioned before, the year of the thrash, if you will.
Thrash tack.
Thrash tack. Some people say it's kind of the death of thrash too. Some like purists are almost like after '86, it just kind of gets like, what's the point after Rain and Blood and Master of Puppets? How can you top those records?
Well, then you get Rust in Peace and Injustice for All, and there's a handful of other ones that come out, but people could say, well, are these really thrash?
I was going to say, purists might say, well, Injustice for All is just like a really great prog metal record, juiced up with a couple thrash riffs here and there. And Rust in Peace, as far as thrashy.
When I think of thrash, I think of just the muted palm guitar riffs, which I think is kind of like one of the big ideas behind it. And I think Justice really kind of pushed that more than anything. Pushed that till it's a lot. Actually, I think Arise is like one of the last great thrash records too, which it's pretty much a thrash record, in all intents and purposes.
Absolutely. But again, so from a scholarly standpoint or fan standpoint, however you want to look at '86 in terms of what it meant to thrash, it was undisputedly a big year. And in a previous episode, I think when we did the 1985 episode, which might have been part 9 or something, we played something from Killing Is My Business from Megadeth, and big leap forward in terms of production, in terms of songwriting, in terms of just everything, competency. It seems like Mustaine's actually focused. Whether or not he's got himself cleaned up at this point,
I think he's pretty whacked out on heroin still.
Yeah, but at the same time, he's at least gotten far enough away from Metallica to get some perspective to write a great.
Isn't
record.
this the last record with Chris Poland?
Yeah, before Poland dies, right?
I don't know if he dies.
No,
I think he got kicked
Gar
out.
Samuelson was the guy that ended up dying.
A lot of drugs going on in this band.
Yeah, but David Elfison and Gar Samuelson and Chris Poland. Poland, didn't he go on and do something for another band after?
He went on to do the Chris Poland Project or something. It was god awful. Yeah.
And but classic cover, really the first classic. Ed
Ripka,
but I forget the character.
Vic,
yes. I guess you could technically say that Vic was on the cover. Killing Is My Business, because it was a skull and crossbones type looking thing on the cover. But I
don't know if we talked about the idea behind that thing.
I don't know if we did.
The cover got damaged or something. The actual painted cover,
happened?
And actually they put that together out of just junk they had laying around to try to, and just took a really quick photo. And
that's
Mustaine's not happy with that.
That's what that whole record feels like, though. Killing Is My Business. It just feels like something that just got thrown together.
It should have been. Right. I think it should have been a handful, 2 to 3 EPs.
Maybe. Yeah.
If they could have made them make sense together, but it just does not. It does not hold up as a cohesive record to me at all.
No, not at all. And I'd say the first half of Peace Sells, the opening 4 or 5 songs, is absolutely incredible and can kind of hold its weight with anything else that was kind of coming out. The problem with this record is, the last half is pretty unmemorable in a sense. I mean, I'm sure I'm pissing a hardcore Megadeth fan off by saying that, but
some Megadeth fans are too
compared to say Rust in Peace, which just works conceptually from start to finish, or Rain and Blood or Master of Puppets or some of these other thrash masterpieces, even Among the Living, which was put out in '87. After you get beyond Peace Sells and Wake Up Dead and Devil's Island and some of that kind of stuff, there's really a lot of those songs don't jump out to me. But it is nice to see Dave back and Dave focused and writing pretty killer stuff.
Do you know what this record cut clocks in at? Because I always had a feeling that it seemed like it went on too long.
I don't know about that.
It might only be 35, 36
yeah, it's probably
minutes.
In the 35 to 40 minute range. I think each song's 4 to 4.5 minutes, and one of the 8 songs. So yeah, so it's probably right around that time. But I had a cassette tape for a long time.
I listened to the first side more.
Exactly,
than
I listen to side 8 all the time. That's just what happens for those of you who have cassette tapes out in there. But this is again the year of thrash. Nuclear Assault puts out their debut, so Dan Lochner it's good to have him back with Game Over. Voivod's still kicking it out. Roar, Destruction and Internal Devastation, which is a pretty solid record.
We've also got pre-Danzig's Sam Hain with November Coming Fire, the last Sam Hain record.
Metal Church is The Dark kind of came out as well, which is a pretty cool thrash record from Seattle. I know Chris is a big Metal Church fan. I never got really into Metal Church though.
They had one. I really don't think I liked the vocalist that much.
Okay.
They were a little too polished for me too.
Yeah. They seem like kind of like a Testament light or something, but I'm probably speaking.
It was almost like Armored Saint light.
There you go.
But not as good a vocalist, and the songs weren't quite as memorable.
Yeah.
But it had a good like guitar crunch, but the lead was always too kind of, I don't know.
Because I think I have like Blessing in Disguise, but I don't know. I don't listen to it much, but so if you're a Metal Church fan out there, give us your insight on what the appeal is of Metal Church. What we're gonna get into next though is kind of it's Metallica, Master and Puppets, and I mean,
if you don't know about this record, or if you haven't heard it, then what the hell? Where have you been living?
What are you doing listening to this podcast? You downloaded the wrong thing, I think.
Yeah, like even in like this is probably like the mid to late 90s, isn't into 2000s, like even the classic rock station would have like a Metallica block every day, and they would not discriminate against records. It'd be across the board, like whatever they felt like playing. So I know this song's probably, you've heard it a million times, but let's throw it in the context of everything else that came out this year. And
yeah, you have to give credit where credit's due. I mean, this was for a lot of people the peak of sort of thrash.
Well, this is one of the underground bands that made good, that actually brought a lot of eyeballs on thrash outside of just like the small focused underground scene that was happening at the time. And
in a way, like Metallica did all this without the help of MTV, without the videos, without singles,
without radio,
and they seemed to sell a ton of
I think they were kind of like the next to Maiden, because Maiden had next to no radio play either, and they basically made their reputation on their touring, and I think Metallica kind of took the baton from them, and they're like the next big band to do that.
And in a sense, it's kind of cool that in the year that Maiden puts out sort of its last classic, record was Somewhere in Time, Metallica puts out the record that really kind of launches them into the stratosphere. Mm-hmm. The passing of the baton, if you will.
Yeah.
And Metallica will take that baton, up into the mid 90s, or well, I guess the early 90s with the Black record, and then kind of things get fuzzy. Yeah. I mean, they're still huge, obviously today, but controversially huge. In terms of metal.
I mean, the last record was decent. I would say it's 50% pretty good. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, Metallica, I think they burned too fast, and I think lost some of what kind of made them. And I think we talked about this last time too. Their formula was so. It wasn't quite as focused as, like, you can say there's like these 5 things that need to be in every Maiden song, and they are in every Maiden song, or Priest songs and stuff. But I think Metallica was a little bit more flexible with that, and I think they didn't have those kind of concerns as much. And then kind of what do we do? Well, we're going to take 5 years off and make some dog shit.
Yeah, and they were too apt, I think, to experiment with things, and I don't want to I think it's cool to do different things and to get outside the box a little bit, but
that's also what B-sides are for.
Yeah, that's true.
To make those kind of huge, those huge leaps.
I mean, Anthrax never muddied up their records with like starting up a posse and stuff like that. I mean, or I'm the Man. I mean, they never put that like in the middle of like Persistence of Time. I mean, they were smart enough to do that kind of stuff. So. But I mean, this is Welcome Home Sanitarium, Orion, which is sort of
thing that should not be.
Yeah,
little H.P. Lovecraft for you.
Yeah, and then Damage Incorporated, which we debated playing, but I
don't like the whisper thing.
Yeah. And Disposable Heroes, kind of great anti-war song, and of course the title track, which is it's. I remember being so surprised when I saw Old School. And that scene happens where the van turns the corner and Master of Puppets Metallica comes in, because to me that was like the mainstreaming of like a song that like I had always considered part of like the metal underground. Like I knew people knew Master of Puppets, but it was like an 8.5 minute song. It's not like Enter Sandman.
It couldn't be on the radio
or something like that. And when that popped in the middle of like Old School, which became like this phenomenon, that made Will Ferrell's career and all these other guys. It was kind of shocking in a way, but like also like very satisfying. I remember feeling like this like sense of like, wow, like my culture has arrived, here we are. Like pop culture is like now consuming Master of Puppets and stuff, but
it took them long enough.
Yeah, but anyway, so we got Battery up from Metallica. And this is sort of the most like, I guess, thrashy, hyper, in your face kind of energy type song on the record, along with Damage Incorporated. And it's a funny song, because I was telling Mark, I'm pretty sure I read in an interview somewhere that Lars just wrote the lyrics in like 5 minutes, and they're horrible lyrics. I mean, it's really not a
lunacy
great
abounding.
Song. Yeah, batteries. Like it's just like it sounds like somebody a German metal band would like come up with.
Well, it sounds like somebody that English wasn't their first language would write. Yeah,
exactly. And then we're going to kind of take things into darker thrash territory, no pun intended, with Dark Angels and Darkness Descends, and the first appearance of Gene Hoglan, who rumor has it plays a pretty big role in extreme metal down the road. So.
Yeah. Name a band he hasn't been in.
Yeah, no doubt.
Him and Steve DiGiorgio are kind of prolific.
I know. And Tony Choi, there's a couple other guys like that. But yeah, Dark Angel, Darkness Descends, kind of ups the ante. I've heard it called caffeine speed metal before. It's like hyper thrash,
Mm-hmm.
But Hoglan, the drummer, paid particular attention to Merciless Death, to some of the stuff he's doing. And then it's going to get into some heavier thrash territory where the line begins to get blurred between thrash and kind of early death metal stuff. So we'll talk about all that stuff when we get back. So enjoy Metallica, Master of Puppets, Battery, Dark Angel, Darkness Ascends, Merciless Death, and then a slew of other classic stuff from '86.
here, like the door, it's dark, it's my shoulder, fucking me, send so fucking get strong, structure, making something now rest, super cloud, with the air, let your wings, resonate. God, chanting the valley of flames, crowds fighting my inner holiness.
Troops of Doom from Sepultura's Morbid Visions, Possessed Beyond the Gates with Restless Dead, Kreator's Ripping Corpse from the Pleasure to Kill record, and then obviously we heard, starting off, Dark Angel's Merciless Death and Battery.
Yes.
So those last three, and I guess you could even argue Dark Angel's kind of a gateway drug into that kind of style of thrash.
Yeah, they're kind of a transitional band, I think, because I mean, for all intents and purposes, I think Kreator, Possessed, and Sepultura were, although they had a lot of thrash elements, I mean, it's basically like proto death metal
stuff. Death metal stuff, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, you listen to some of the stuff going on, Ripping Corpse. I mean, it's a souped up Slayer riff in a way, but then
especially vocally,
yeah,
you know, like Milla's vocals at this point are pretty close. You couldn't differentiate this from a lot of death metal stuff.
And I think no one's in debate that Jeff Becker's stuff that he was doing with Bakara's stuff from Possessed was obviously death metal, because we were talking about Seven Churches in a previous episode, and this is kind of a continuation of the classic lineup Beyond the Gates.
It's a little more I don't know, the Seven Churches has such a great production to it. I mean, it kind of fits the tone of the album too. This one, the production seems a little off to me.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of I would say weird. It sounds like almost like rototom drums and like too many drum fills, and it's kind of like their transitional period before they just kind of
kind of fade away. Yeah. But still a pretty solid record for '86. For that type of music, there wasn't really much of that like kind of out there. I mean, we've talked about Kreator before. We did an entire show devoted to him, but like Kreator alongside, we mentioned before, Destruction, and then Sodom. What the German metal scene was sort of pushing forward was pretty big deal. And Pleasure to Kill is kind of considered one of the first great classic records from Kreator. Like kind of really the first of like a run of 4 records that are absolutely fantastic. Peaking with Coma of Souls and stuff. So, and then Sepultura, Morbid Visions.
Which many people might know is the Morbid Visions Bestial Devastation split, which was put out, I think that was put out after they kind of started getting a little bit popular with the Rise.
I think so too.
Got reissued.
And Bestial Devastation was 85, and then Morbid Visions was 86, and then they re-recorded Troops of Doom on Schizophrenia, yeah, in 87, I think, was when Schizophrenia comes out.
Yeah, and also they redo it on Dead Embryonic Cells EP for Rise.
So this is kind of like I don't know, there's like their song. I know the first, I guess, classic Sepultura.
It's almost
song.
how Thorns kind of recrafted. What was it?
It starts with an A. I'm losing it. Airy Descent.
Airy Descent. That's right. They did 3 or 4 or 5 different versions throughout the career. So it's kind of one of those kind of songs.
It's like Coltrane's My Favorite Things or something.
Yeah.
Like always recrafting it.
Yeah.
Troops of Doom has the great timpani stuff going on, which is kind of cheesy, but
I don't like that. That's the part I don't like in the song.
Yeah. It adds a world music flavor to it, which is what Sepultura was going to kind of be known for. But this is along with Sarcophago, this was kind of like a whole new scene that was going on in South America with the kind of South American thrash, death, black metal type stuff.
Well, as far as you go through, the lyrical stuff a little bit later on, but all the kind of social upheaval that was happening at the time. Sepultura was kind of almost like a linchpin for people to get around to actually get behind something.
Well, and understanding some of the weird political stuff that was happening in places like Brazil, with the prison abuse and political scandals and just the way that the poor were mistreated and the native population were wiped out. The whole thing with Kaiawas from KSAD, the tribe that committed mass suicide in order to protest the encroaching globalization and stuff like that. Say what you want about Sepultura, maybe you don't dig the stuff beyond Roots and stuff, but at least they created a legacy for themselves and I think opened the world up to non-European, non-American metal.
Well, and metal that actually had some kind of social conscience too. It was more punk rock in that kind of way. It wasn't just talking about bullshit demons or whatever.
Yeah. And I'm not for sure. I don't have the lyric sheet in front of me. What
I think the earlier on, but it's basically when they hit Schizophrenia. That's when everything started to be a little bit more like internal lyrics, or just kind of broad, society kind of whatever.
So I think they started off more like kind of Slayer like lyrics, and then kind of transitioned more towards, I guess,
which makes sense. Start out as a teenager, you don't really care as much unless it's right in your face about what's going on in political climate.
Yeah, but it's kind of a nice. I see Morbid Visions kind of like not like the official start, but that's like the first polished piece of work from Sepultura.
I think it's where they start to kind of get their formula of what works for them and kind of their overguiding principles, along
with this sort of kind of having the world music kind of appeal and things like that was happening in there. But
and the battery bullet belts.
Yes, that if you see Global Metal, the documentary, they talk about how they created those all out of batteries because they saw the Destruction cover and stuff.
Yeah,
it was kind of cool. But we're going to end things kind of with a trio of tunes tonight that represent, in a sense, either beginnings or really kind of peaks of where you can take certain types of sound beyond sort of the thrash stuff that we just heard, and beyond the speed, beyond some of the intensity of what Kreator and Possessed and some of these bands were doing. The other things that were kind of pushing the limits around this time, Conflicts, Ungovernable Force was coming out, and that was a pretty, along with Siege and some of those other bands, pretty influential in the grind scene in the UK.
Yeah, and what would become known as crust as well.
Yep. Abominations of Desolation by Morbid Angel was recorded in '86, but wasn't heard until '89.
For good reason, I think. Mike Browning kind of really soured the brew on that album. His drumming and his vocal performances.
Not a big. Mark's not the biggest Nocturnus fan.
No.
And I'm not either. I don't know too many big Nocturnus fans. I guess
I think the Keys got a couple decent songs, but it's
It's Angel. It gave us Angel of Disease at least at least Dave Vincent could rework for Covenant.
Oh, there's some good songs on it, but just there's that glaring kind of
it's a rough beginning.
Mike Browning,
we're going to talk about the Canadian metal scene, but coming up here in a second. But Canada was doing some pretty extreme stuff as well. It wasn't just the American or the German or even the Brazilian stuff.
Slaughter.
Yeah, it was Strapato, which is a pretty cool record that Mark and I have just sort of recently discovered. We're preparing it for our Canadian metal show that's soon to be coming down the pike. But a band that we are going to play from Canada was Infernal Majesty from the None Shall Defy record. It's a song called SOS, which is like Servants of Satan or something. It's something with Satan. Is what it stands for. incredibly heavy. I mean, almost black metal type leanings in some of the stuff that's going on here.
I mean, it reminds me of stuff that like Merciless would later go on to do, or even like Tormentor and stuff like that. That was, the pre-death metal kind of stuff. But this is like, there's so many, like the riffing. There's like, okay, here's templates for Swedish death metal riffing, vocally. Just everything. It seemed to like be, I don't know how,
way ahead of its time.
Yeah, and I don't know how much this penetrated anything being,
I mean, there's
Canadian
a few bands that have covered Infernal Majesty, and we clearly were talking when Mark and I were listening to it the other day. We clearly could hear like Dark Throne influence, for sure.
Oh yeah,
this is the kind of stuff that Fenrez would get a hold of. And you said that you thought that for some reason a lot of the European metal bands would have, or European teenagers would have been able to get a hold of some of the Canadian stuff easier than America.
I would think just because it's usually in the same systems,
because of the same distribution systems and stuff. Yeah,
because even like Canadian imports when I was a kid, that was a lot of those bands just they didn't have U.S. distribution,
so it's kind of a rarity. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. So maybe bands like Slaughter and Infernal Majesty had more of an impact over in Europe than in America, and that's why.
Yeah, I'd imagine probably a lot of them were on UK based labels, or since it's all one big kingdom.
Sure. And Infernal Majesty, for some people who are into the extreme metal scene, people will know another song from None Shall Defy, which is Night of the Living Dead, that Dawn covered.
Fantastic song.
Yeah, and we played that actually on our Halloween episode, I'm pretty sure. But another band that's kicking it out in '86 was Repulsion. They record Horrified, and a lot of the songs were recorded then, even though it doesn't really get released until like 88, 89, via Relapse and stuff.
But a lot of this stuff was, it was hitting the tape trading scene.
It was floating around. It was clearly having a big influence, on Napalm Death and Entombed and, a lot of the Swedish bands in terms of the birth of the blast beat, really.
Yeah.
Along with Charlie Benante and SOD, there's a debate over who kind of crafted it, but who cares?
It's always been there. It's just somebody had to pluck it out of the ether.
Exactly. And Flint, Michigan, hometown heroes for Mark and I. We actually got to see Repulsion a few weeks ago at Maryland Metal Fest, and they were pretty hit. Scott Carlson seems like a pretty fun guy to hang out with, I'd imagine. So we've got Repulsion, Horrified, Stench of Burning Death, kind of to help open things up on our closing set here. Infernal Majesty's None Shall Defy. And then, of course, we're ending with the mighty Slayer, Rain and Blood, with Raining Blood. And
everybody knows the song.
There's not a whole lot I can say to really amp up this song anymore, other than to say it might quite possibly be the greatest riff in heavy metal history. It's just absolutely, I mowed a lot of lawns to this song, let's just put it that way. And it's a good way to kind of close things out, and it's kind of arguably, from a lot of purist perspectives, the sort of most influential metal record of all time, or one of them, along with probably early Black Sabbath. I
think one of the most, I guess, broadly appreciated as well out of any genre. I mean, as far as like
punk kids get into this record,
and I mean, it just feel like you find it in like Mojo Magazine will talk about how it's an influential record. And I think a lot of it had to do with the Rick Rubin kind of factor too. But out of
and
any
energy,
like
the passion,
out of any metal record,
I
think yes, this for some reason this really like got everybody's attention because it was like, holy shit, this is what can really happen when it's produced well too.
And I think it's a record like this that begs the question of, is this as far as thrash can go?
Yeah.
Because once you hear Darkness Descends and this and Pleasure to Kill, like, what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
So, but anyways, that's for you to debate endlessly. And if you have some comments, please send them our way at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Leave us some comments on iTunes or on the website, requiempodcast.com. Check us out on Facebook as well. So enjoy the fourth most crucial year in metal history, according to the humbly Jason and Mark here. 1986 concludes with Repulsion, Infernal Majesty, and Slayer's Raining Blood. So for Requiem Podcast, I'm Jason.
And for 1986, I'm Mark.
Stench of Burning Death. Enjoy.
Everywhere smells death. Make them sleep, that's fouled up. We scream attention without me.